Yoko asked her to do this, but I just want you to rip me down. It might come down in one solid piece. It might come down in a bunch of pieces. Claw at it, do whatever you want to, but you know, you want to figure that out. But I just kind of want to switch. There you go. Please.
So question, is this the one you got ready to for?
No.
Dispose or recycle. I don't know what it is.
Get angry.
Submit that too.
I feel like, thinking of it this way, like, wanting to to design it or something, I have no idea. But now I feel really bad that the entire image of this artist, this person's presence is gone. And I like the way visually the way this one's done. So look, I still am struggling a little bit with text. The way the text is scripted on this web versus more free form, harder to read text on that one. I mean, it's potent language. Maybe why nobody wants to talk about it.
I'm happy to talk about it. I was just reading my journal. All right, so I feel like your statement is really good, and you have all these things in here that seem really important to you. You know, even things that I've been hearing you talk about when you first come in. And, you know, being able to talk about this and acknowledge it and put like intelligent language to it, I don't think, that's not nothing. I think that's important. And so then to talk about the piece, so like here is the idea, right? And the piece is more complicated because you set it up as a performance, but it was really for us, but we wouldn't have known to do it. Like, so I'm not sure what you were thinking would come from all of this for us, you know, like what would be our experience. And so Chrissy starts talking about the visual, but I don't feel like that was the point, right?
But it's pretty visual.
Yeah, so it's really visual. So we have this sort of graffiti thing, really important text that relates back to this. So I don't know what you guys have talked, if you talked about this at all, like how these ideas manifest. And I think it's interesting to even imagine that you would start to work with graffiti, now just with that, you know, having been such a like a careful photographer and working with process and imagery. This kind of almost like a billboard that got left behind, you know, and parts of it are worn away, and then someone came and spray painted on top of it.
It's like decollage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know, you know, like I don't know exactly how it all connects, but I like the statement.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty direct, you know, a white male image with a flag, and then you rip it across, and it's like we don't need it under white male voice, and it's pretty.
I know, but then the nuance is gone. See,
The
so
nuance
that's
of the
where-
statement.
Yeah, because that's when you say, encourages the public to tear down the white male and peel back the dense layers underneath that exist and start a conversation of how messy and consuming it will be to birth the doctrine of equality without social equality. That's really complicated and dense, and I think an important thing that you've been, you know, thinking about and wrestling with.
If it's something for us to interpret, then you don't have to answer, and I'll try to figure it out. But is there a reason that there's a recycling exposed, or would you like us to? You want us to do that?
It definitely seems intentional. Like, I mean, I noticed that we had this
I mean,
choice
I
to.
don't know exactly what the tape does, unless it's just.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I mean, I definitely had that sense of tension of like, what does it mean to throw him away versus recycle him and him be used again, right?
And it could almost, forgive me if I'm jumping the gun, but it also could read as, are we tearing down the image or the idea of a white male or the white male voice, and are we just recycling it into something else, or are we just gonna dispose of it completely because we need to start over because there's just too much of it as per the statements? And I like how there's the question and like the answer, but the answers aren't, even though the answers are kind of solid, I feel like they're still open, because it says, do we need another white male voice? It doesn't say, do we need a white male voice? So this is another trying to insinuate that there's others. This is another one on top of more. And then it says we don't need another, meaning that there are already white male voices. But that also leads me to think, does that mean the white male voices that are the others, are they considered a value, or are they the ones that consider that they can speak, but the new ones, the another ones, are not allowed to? I don't know. It's a perplexing thing that makes you think.
It made me wonder, you know, I mean, it's your portrait on there, right? So
Yeah,
you become the other white male voice, in which case, it's like, are we really being asked, do we need your voice, or is it this sort of generalized part of culture that's in question, right?
I think it's interesting to think about, and probably pretty courageous to think about putting yourself in the position of the white male voice, right? You know, so it's not like you're saying, oh, all those other white guys, they think this, but not me, you know, like I don't, which it brings in the other, you know, like, oh, there may be others, but then in both instances, it's you, you know, and so then there's this recognition, because I think it's a recognition that we all have to have, that we're all complicit, right? You know, in this cultural situation that we find, this social and cultural situation that we find ourselves in. It's not just white men, it's everybody. You know, we either do something to make things different, or we're going along with the.
And
It also, sorry, it also talks about the problematics of the argument to say that there is a white male voice, that there isn't a variety
Yeah.
within that situation.
And this is just based off of my experiences, but like, it's almost like I feel the frustration behind it, because I feel, when I hear white male voice, already there's so much social context behind that, and the fact that the whole white male dominant society type situation comes into play, where it's like, yeah, we don't need another one, because there's so many of you, but also, humanely speaking, how are we supposed to talk about equality, but we're trying to destroy every other new white male voice, even if they are against whatever the culture may be going for at the time. But it really makes me think about that as well, because I feel like that's in the back of everyone's head sometimes, when we're like so just absorbed with, oh, now we gotta represent black people, Mexicans, Hispanics, no more white male voices. We have enough of you. You have had centuries to rule. It is our turn. But at the same time, for me, I feel the angst and the anger behind, just because it's another white male voice doesn't mean it's the same one. That's why I feel like the another is important, because there's other white male voices that have other opinions. It's not just this one identity. Just for example, if I said the black male voice, you probably might take that a different way versus white male voice because of the context. But that's why I feel like it's at play here. I like that.
Well, so we've talked a lot, so like I don't want to say too much, because I feel like you've already given,
Come on.
we already have answers,
Right.
but I feel like we need to get to. But I think one of the things that I like about this is the fact that, and we kind of talked about it, I think it works nicely here, and it's interesting that to hear Eddie talk about like question and answer, whereas it's not question and answer.
That's what I
It's
was-
two different statements, right? Like, so it's not about saying we don't, it's not about saying we do, it's just about making statements and then allowing your viewer to process that information and seek their own conclusion. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. I do agree with Christy a lot that the graffiti doesn't work over here for me, partly because it's hard to get to visually when compared to such the bold, the clean line of this. I think it's just a little too much. I like the more natural element to it. I just think it's just a little too far apart. But I like I really enjoy the statement, and I think it's a much more, and maybe it's what Barbara was getting to as well, it's a much more clear version of, I think, what you've been trying to say for so long. And it's a nice processing of both a personal journey and I think a social journey, right? And kind of melding those two things together for you.
I think one of the things that I thought about while we were in the action of doing that was how much, I was trying to, in my head, think about, like, what part do I remove?
Right.
I mean, I was really
Yeah, I
thinking
saw
like.
you were trying to
I was
actually
trying
do
to-
it artfully and leave pieces.
Yeah, and then I was like, what am I doing? So, or I was trying to put them back up, and then I started thinking about just in the creation of this as a performance, if it's re-performed, in different situations, that the more layers there are, because when I did pull one of them back, there was marking on
Yeah,
the
it was
eyeball.
writing or drawing.
Right, of the one on this side anyway, and I was like, oh, okay, so if the reveal, if this removal is a reveal, you know what I mean? It's like, that's different.
I also want to note that this is, right now, we're still experiencing the artwork right now.
Sure,
because
it's
he's
hard to
signed
talk
this.
about it.
'Cause
I love
I
this
just
part.
want to note that because he, as a white male, he's not.
Not
speaking
using
right
his
now.
voice.
And like, we keep trying to talk to him, and he keeps going, because the white male voice, again, it's kind of, I'm just noting that. I like that. I like this right now. This is interesting.
I'm actually gonna ask him a question.
Good
Disrupt that. Can you talk about your decision to put what 80s glam metal bands on one side and fashion models on the other?
I don't think you're gonna get an answer right now,
You're
because
not
I
gonna
think we're
talk?
performing. What I think, but I mean, I think we gotta all make an assumption, and that maybe assumption is the word we're not supposed to be doing in society.
And I feel like the work also is that we are overshadowing his voice, and he's allowing that because culturally, right now, if we let the white male voice speak, it's almost like, well, you've had your turn, you shouldn't speak right now. Like, so maybe I feel the performative aspect that's happening right now works better
Maybe
well.
more, yeah,
Like,
maybe.
we're discussing his voice, but he's not allowed to discuss his voice the way, society is set up, so,
I mean, I think it had, I mean, those bands are what, that's like, those particular types of
But
bands.
they're also like, they made themselves feminine.
That's
as
right,
a-
yeah.
as a-
So, I mean, that's
as a
where
mode
I'm
of
playing with it.
hyper-masculinity.
Yeah. That was sort of the glam rock or whatever, and then we go to this more sort of fashion, couture-looking female images. So that's the place I'm playing with these as imagery or reveal.
Related to that, if someone were to tell me that I was gonna go to an art show about, this subject, he would not be who came to my head as the artist. I would think of my neighbor wearing camo, driving a truck. So, I mean, like, you could be in one of those, man.
Right.
Right.
Well, so what's your conclusion of that?
Why do you think
I don't know.
somebody in camo driving a truck would make this work?
Well, I'm not saying it would make it work.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
saying
it's
that's the
like-
stereotype, right?
I think you're talking about the
Oh.
stereotypical idea of
I
the
think like,
white male
why,
voice.
Of the
Like
question.
the hard
or the
edge.
question, or
Well, I think
the,
of businessmen, I think of
Huh.
like a man in business.
I
I'm
think
from
of politicians.
Pennsylvania.
I think of politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, me
Well, this whole, I did not want to pull any of that picture off the wall. I did not want to participate in this. It's just like pushing all my buttons. It's just like, it's all, and it's all like obvious to me, like for me, that's what I'm saying to myself internally. It's like, okay, I've seen this 100
too.
times.
Okay,
like-
I was doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, but I'm like, wait a minute, I agreed to be here, he's asking me to do this, I've already committed to the process, I better I care about this person and his commitment, I better walk over there and pull something off. So I did that, but
Right,
it's
but-
only because I was personally invested, to be honest. If this
Yeah,
was in a
yeah.
public situation, I would not have done that.
Oh.
But, taking a moment, but I'm gonna actually bother to think about that and why, it would be because I don't even involve myself in these conversations. I dismiss these conversations, so I don't actually ever even go in a lot of ways. So there are situations where I never bother to go the distance myself, so it makes me aware of that and how dismissive I can be of certain stereotypes.
For me, it was more dismissive of the performance,
Mhm.
not so much the message.
Mhm.
Because I have been in a lot of these situations too, and a lot of, done a lot of that participatory stuff, and I'm kind of jaded on it. You know, so the being forced, in a way, like not being forced, but because we care and we're in this situation. But that is something to think about, you know, if it becomes a piece that goes outside of a place where you have a sympathetic audience, you know, like, what does that look like there? And this worked really because of the sitting down, and being quiet for so long and giving everybody a chance. And in another situation, people might not be that generous with their time.
If you have Carl.
Well, I mean, I guess a couple of things, but one is that I mean, I think that, to me, it feels like it's part of the piece is to examine our own complicitness.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I mean, it's also taking place in art school and in an MFA program, right? So like, there's questions that are being asked that exist I guess we can look at it as something that could exist outside the world, but it seems like hyper related to our particular experience. That's like the one thing. And we did rip, and I mean, I didn't like the choices, and I didn't want those choices either, but I picked them anyway. And the bigger issue is like, oh, well, I do know this person, and like, how often am I really complicit in a circumstance because I know that person because they're kind of guiding me along, right? So we could have opted out actually, right? Like, that's another thing.
But the camera changes that dynamic too.
The camera?
Because then if you opted out, you're recorded as being opted out. You didn't
I
just
never
slyly
thought
move
about
to
the
the
camera.
side.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things I took into
Ooh, yeah.
consideration. I was like,
Yeah.
and I'm being videotaped tearing this off.
We're being videotaped anyway, and
Right.
all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, but
See the
we're
camera.
aware that this is documentation, right? This is documentation.
And I did, and I was like maintaining some of those feelings throughout the process because I didn't want to stick my piece of paper in either one of those canvases in my pocket.
It's in your pocket.
Yeah, I did, it's like, I still haven't completely processed all the implications of making either one of those two choices only.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm just like, okay, I'm committed, but this is still a place like where I have some agency to make a decision about in what way I want to invest in this performance. And so I'll stick it in my pocket so I can think about it a little bit longer.
I think it's, you know, I appreciate this piece because I feel like it's really bringing up like some really, it is this issue that is pervasive that nobody really wants to talk about. It's that white male voice, right, that has, quote, had lots of time to have, you know, a presence. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're still all individuals, and like, what's worse than not being able to express yourself, which is like, you know. So like, what do we do with that?
And that's why, because it's this last statement, where it says to start a conversation how messy and consuming it will be to spread the doctrine of equality without social cultural influence. To me, that what I pulled out of that of how strange the conversation is to talk about the other side, because most of our culture is fighting against that side in the sense of that we're trying to talk about all the other voices. We're not going to question the voice that's been in power for so long, because that's something I've always been preoccupied with, and this really just helped bring it home in the fact of that, yeah, we're fighting for all this equality, but at the same time, are we trying to like level the playing field by saying, well, you had all this time, so we're gonna shame you for all this time to make up for it, instead of just, we just want to meet you here, but it's kind of like, no, we want to overtake you because you've overtaken us for so long. So it's interesting.
I would say that, you know, this piece is predicated on a kind of, I mean, you know, I'm going to, interject my kind of Marxist perspective, right? That this piece is predicated on a politics of recognition, right? Who gets recognized, who gets a platform. But there are other kinds of politics that are elided by these questions, and they're very important today. And, you know, I think sometimes we get lost in a maze when we think entirely about politics as a politics of representation of who speaks and who speaks when, right? As opposed to what kind of lives are people able to live, right? So
Yeah.
I would just interject.
Well,
that.
and actually, that's a good point. I was going to say something similar to that as a jump off to what Eddie was saying, because I feel like we do fall into that trap when we start talking about power dynamics, where somebody's, where it's always got to be hierarchical, right? You know, so, oh, because you had this, then we get this, and we're gonna balance it out, and white men don't get to have a voice because they had a voice for so long. But I really feel like, in a way, as much as we can say, oh, maybe that's sort of the situation that we're in, as artists and as human beings, you know, everybody has an opportunity to have a voice, right? So, you know, every white man here, you know, is also having that opportunity to have a voice and to say something. What is that thing that's going to be said?
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily mean that that voice is canceled out. Just because they're white men, it means that they maybe, in fact, still have more power to have a voice, but what is it that's being said?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I think like the fullness of this process as a performance that's still going on makes me think a lot about the broad strokes that these gestures and stereotypes in our first initial read, and how quickly dismissive we are of those, and when we're faced with those situations or that sort of information, or we're given something that's so loud on the face, how the complexity of the individual is never, like, we don't get anywhere near that thought, and how in community, really the responsibility of community is to engage in the complexity of the individual, which actually is the basis of the community. So there's a lot in this piece too to think about, like in Chuck's practice, but beyond Chuck's practice about the process for all of us to do.
Well, I think this particular performance that's ongoing is, is a way that is showing for us the way in which art should enact a conversation. I mean, as a discursive language, art is to enact conversation around something. Whether it's any of the things you guys talked about in your presentations up there about family, memory, power, whatever that was that we talked about upstairs. There's nuances to all of it. And I think this piece is showing that that's the power of art, right? That we would sit here for 20 minutes or whatever and talk about white girl voice. So I think in that way it's a really successful interaction.
The Barbara Kruger feel for me,
Yeah.
that comes from a man's point of
That's a
view.
really good point.
Because she would say, we don't need another hero, whatever.
Right.
But I appreciate it coming from voice, and especially in this moment of time, when, from women who were very hopeful from the women's movement that there would be a lot more equality in our community, to see then the politics shape up in some countries, to be able to go over and tear this thing down felt great to me. I kind of enjoyed it.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And honest.
Just kind of speaking kind of technically about the piece, and I think going back to maybe kind of some, I think Moses had kind of mentioned this, and Jacob has kind of that too. But the idea of like bringing us into it to engage them, trip and tear them down. If this does continue right somewhere else, thinking about how that is facilitated, how we're brought into the pieces, right? That space could maybe happen a little differently. It just, and for argument's sake, right, the takeoff line usually immediately refers to the line that we shouldn't cross,
Right.
particularly when it comes to artwork in a space. Asking us to immediately think the exact opposite of that is actually a pretty big leap. So it may be something that actually kind of brings us into the pieces as soon as we walk in. Not saying like an arrow, but something that from an earlier standpoint makes us realize that we're part of the work, and that may and I say that particularly outside of a space like here, like again we're making a lot of assumptions, like I said, because we're in this building, you're in grad school, right? But in a standard gallery space, how might that happen, how might that function? So continue, I think, to think about how you ask us to participate and whether or not the experience of participating becomes essential. So for people who decide not to tear down the work,